Are you afraid of statues? If you are, then you're definitely going to want to steer clear of this one. This is the curse of the crying boy statue, and once you hear what it's said to be capable of, you might just find yourself never wanting to visit Italy again. These sculptures can apparently bring nothing but misfortune and tragedy to whoever owns them, and that's why you'll often see them hidden away or even destroyed. But these aren't just any old statues. They're all based off the same mold, making them copies of each other. So if one brings bad luck, does that mean they all do? And if so, how many people have died because of them? Let's take a look at the horrifying history of this curse and what we can learn from it. But before we start, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on future videos. Also, be sure to stick around for number 3. It's definitely the worst case of the curse and will probably leave you terrified of Italian art forever. First things first, what exactly is the curse of the crying boy? Well, it's said to be tied to a number of terracotta sculptures all throughout Italy, though some have made their way abroad. In fact, there are believed to be as many as 12,000 of them out there. The originals were crafted by an artist named Antonio Rossellino in the early 1400s. He was known for his religious artwork, which is why he was given the commission to craft a series of statues based off biblical stories. Of course, with so many different stories to choose from, you'd think he might have picked something a little less morbid than the story of Tobias and the angel. In case you weren't familiar with that story, it goes like this. Tobias was a young man who was blind from birth. His father was so worried about him being alone and helpless, so he sent him to stay with his friend Gaba. While there, Tobias asked Gaba to help him get married so he could, procreate and maybe not be such a burden. Gaba agreed, but only on one condition. He said that Tobias had to carry with him the fish that he used for a sacrifice. Yeah, weird condition, right? Well, somehow during their journey home, those fish ended up being sold and Tobias was left with absolutely nothing. On the bright side, though, an angel appeared to him and told him not to worry, saying that he'd actually be getting much more than he bargained for. The angel then proceeded to heal Tobias's blindness and marry him. To say thank you, Tobias and his new wife went to a nearby river to sacrifice a fish. But while Tobias was in the water, the fish slipped out of his hands and swam away. Not wanting to waste the sacrifice, Tobias dove into the water after it, but he quickly realized that he couldn't find the bottom. That's when he panicked, realizing that he was drowning. Just as he was running out of air, though, the angel returned to save him once again. After pulling Tobias from the water, the angel said that he needed to teach him an important lesson. He then proceeded to whip Tobias until he died. Yeah, happy ending, right? So, yeah, I can see why Rossellino didn't want to make too many of these statues. Even back then, people seemed to agree with him. They found the subject matter quite disturbing, and it wasn't long before the pieces started to be linked with tragedies. There were reports of fires and accidents happening to anyone who owned one of the statues, and soon enough, people began to believe that they were cursed. Of course, this was hundreds of years ago, and there wasn't really any scientific evidence to prove that the statues were responsible. People were desperate for answers, and they needed someone to blame. So it must have been quite comforting for them to have something concrete to point to whenever something bad happened. And this led to the creation of one of the most terrifying urban legends in history. One of the most famous cases was a woman who bought one of the statues from a flea market thinking that she was getting a great deal. She was excited to have such an old piece of art, but that excitement quickly turned to terror. One night she heard footsteps coming down her stairs, and as she slowly made her way to the top, she saw the figure standing perfectly still on the landing. She screamed and ran out of the house, but she couldn't stop thinking about what she had seen. So she returned to the house the following day. The statue was gone. No, it hadn't levitated or teleported or anything like that. Instead, her granddaughter had taken it without asking and placed it in her room. When the woman confronted her, her granddaughter said that she had been having nightmares ever since she took the statue and she wanted to return it. She also said that she hadn't touched the statue since the day she brought it home, yet it was now covered in dust. You can probably guess what happened next. The woman immediately took the statue back, hoping that it would put an end to whatever evil it was unleashing. But she never should have done that. A few days later, her house caught fire and burned to the ground. Luckily, she and her family were able to escape unharmed, but they lost everything. And although no one was hurt, it was clear that the statue had to go. They took it to a church and buried it underneath the altar, hoping to finally be rid of it. However, it seems that the evil simply couldn't be contained. Shortly after, the priest began experiencing strange visions, ones that eventually drove him insane. As you might expect, tales like this one spread like wildfire, and it wasn't long before every church and museum in Italy was getting rid of the sculptures. But here's where things get interesting. As I already mentioned, there are said to be 12,000 of these statues in existence today, and that means that many of them were likely smuggled out during this time. People didn't want them anywhere near them, but that didn't mean they didn't want them in their possession. Private collectors would sneak them into their homes under the cover of night, secretly hoping to profit from the curse. And although this isn't confirmed, it's possible that the original sculptor was behind some of these secret shipments. Well, that might sound a bit far-fetched. There's a lot of money to be made by owning one of these statues. In fact, that's exactly what happened to a man named David. He bought one of the statues for just $6, not knowing that it was worth thousands. He tried to sell it to collectors, but they either laughed at him or told him that it was cursed. Although he didn't believe in curses, he was still wary of keeping the statue around. So he decided to list it on eBay with a starting bid of 1 cent. What he didn't realize was that there were plenty of gullible people out there who believed in the curse and would be willing to pay big money to keep it away from their rivals. The bidding quickly got out of hand, and he ended up selling the statue for $800–900. However, there is another theory regarding these statues. Some people claim that there is no curse at all, but instead that the bad things happening to people are simply coincidences. They argue that whenever something negative happens, people tend to search for someone or something to blame, and these statues became the scapegoat. But if that's true, then why did the original artist stop making them? Well, it could be that he simply felt bad about creating something that would cause so much suffering. After all, he knew the stories behind the statues and what they represented. Or it could be that he was aware of the supposed curse and wanted to distance himself from it. Either way, it makes sense that he wouldn't want to risk his reputation by continuing to produce them. Now, whether or not you believe in the curse, there's no denying that these statues are incredibly creepy. I'm sure you can agree that you wouldn't want one in your house. Now, if you want to hear more about cursed objects, check out the video on screen. Just a reminder also, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on future videos. Until then, I'll see you next time.